Our next presentation will be Solving Complex Problems with Diverse Teams by Dr. Katherine Kahn. She is a parishioner at St. Paul's Antiochian Orthodox Church north of Seattle and at St. Aidan's Antiochian Orthodox Church in Manchester, United Kingdom. She works internationally with diverse teams of scientists to address the needs of smallholder farmers in sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia. This involves connecting scientists, funders, government authorities, and farmers in partnerships to create new pathways out of poverty through sustainable agricultural development. Kathy is passionate about fostering more engagement and leadership with scientists based in low-income countries who are embedded in the communities they serve. She is exploring and applying tools of archetypal psychology to help scientists establish shared purpose, innovate, and manage the uncertainties and complexities inherent in their work. She holds a PhD in molecular biology and biochemistry and has worked as a plant biologist in academic research institutions with the US government and in private philanthropy. Dr. Kahn shared with us some personal stories from her own work and that of her colleagues in studying and protecting cassava farming throughout Africa. From this experience, she distilled some best practices on organizing and working with a diverse team. Dr. Kahn.
Great, thank you, Jessica. Thank you, Holly. And it's lovely to be with you all online and to connect through this, virtual space. It's actually one of the first times that I'm talking to a group of Christians about my work, because I'm much more used to talking in the secular world to scientists. And I found it quite interesting to give the presentation because afterwards I was really energized, by just the recognition of, yes, I do see this work as a calling. It's a calling in the secular world. But it is very much something that I feel God has called me to. And so it just feels a real privilege and an honor to share that with you. And I'm really grateful to the organizers for inviting me. So it's a little different, but I hope you'll find something that you can apply to your situations. So I'm not going to go through my whole talk again and, invite you to take a look at that if you've got 30 minutes to learn about something a little different. But this is a point of connection for me with our faith and with the work that I do. So I work at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and I'm a program officer there, and I manage grants to try and help farmers in low-income situations, particularly in Africa. And I told the story in my presentation of this scientist here, Joseph Ndunguru, who's wearing jeans here. And just this was a picture that he had taken while he was out and about in Tanzania trying to study this devastating disease caused by viruses of cassava brown streak disease. And I told the story of how Joseph was holding the hand of this grandmother in the family who'd stopped eating so that the children in the family could have more to eat. Because of the devastation of these diseases, this is all that they were left with, and that food needed to last them a long time. So often for me, it's quite a disconnect. When I'm in Seattle or now in England, I live in a very privileged, comfortable, wealthy environment. And yet, when I travel to Africa, I also stay in very nice hotels and have lovely food and, I'm very well taken care of. And yet the work aims to reach and serve, the poorest of the poor. And quite often that's a real disconnect. And I thought it would just be perhaps worthwhile, perhaps even a little provocative, to give you an example of one time when these worlds came together for me. So Joseph Ndunguru, as the scientist I mentioned, he came to Seattle to visit us one time. We were working on some projects together, and so he traveled out to Seattle. And it happened to be, he came in over the weekend of Pascha, of Orthodox Easter. And Joseph is actually a very committed Christian. He's Roman Catholic. So he had celebrated Easter before, because Orthodox Easter was later. And so I invited him to come on the Sunday and to join our church for the Agape Vespers that we had on great and glorious Pascha afternoon. And it's a big party and it's a wonderful celebration. And we have these beautiful Agape Vespers, and then there's a feast and lots of games and things for the children. And so I felt I had to warn Joseph before he joined us, as I drove him to our church, that Joseph, I just need you to understand that one of the games that we play at the church is that the children and some adults, we throw eggs to each other across the grounds, and the eggs break, and that's the game, is you throw to each other and you see who can go so far and catch the egg without it breaking, and there's a whole stack of eggs that get thrown and broken during this game. And I knew I needed to prep him that we're in America, and this is one of the things that people do in America, to play games. They throw and break eggs. And he just kept saying, no, really? Like, really? They're going to be throwing eggs? And, and so we went through the story like 3 times, and sure enough, the game did happen. And it was a moment of just dissonance, the world that we live in, so much wealth, and yet we connect, with such poverty. And yeah, I think I want that to continue to be a discomfort for me, because it's the reality of the world that we're in, and Christ calls us, to live in that world, but to share what we can of our great wealth, even at a time of suffering, with the least of these. So it's a privilege to engage in this, even from a secular situation. Now, I told the story of this project WAVE, West Africa Virus Epidemiology, that Joseph is connected with, and what they're trying to do is to protect against cassava viruses, these cassava diseases that are spreading across Africa. So this is to show you what these particular virus diseases look like. And that was the example of the complex problem, that I drew out some lessons of how we were working with a small team to address these complex problems. And I gave just 3 different examples of ways that we were including everyone to work on this problem. And so one of the things that we did with a group of scientists was we really tried to map out who we needed to influence and how we needed to work together to solve this complex problem. And it forced us all to step outside our own perspective and to think of the various perspectives of the different groups in the system. So we had farmers, we had government people, we had other scientists, and in that process and drawing out these voices, together we came to the realization that we really need to engage with government ministers. And it was just this amazing experience of working with this group, where they used these local chiefs and local leaders to influence their government ministers in the region. And if you want to hear more about that, like, I invite you to watch the talk. I won't go through it again now, but it was so one of the things we did with this group after we'd identified them was something which we call an anti-problem. I think, it's sort of describing the opposite of what you want to happen. So, just as I think it was Father Sergius was talking, and I'm not a theologian, but was talking about how you describe what God is not to understand what God is. Sometimes when you describe what you don't want to happen, it can help you realize what you do want to happen. And so we had this really dynamic discussion about, well, how would we spread these diseases, and from that understanding of what would we do to spread them, it helped us come to an understanding and to get everybody on board with what we would need to do to stop spreading them. And so one of the ways that diseases get spread is people don't identify them early, they don't realize they're spreading, and if they find them, they don't tell anyone, and so you can't deal with it, and then problem becomes too big. And and so just going through this, it really helped the group come together and identify what they needed to do to address the problem more positively. And then recently, I just would recommend this to you. I came across this really active community called Liberating Structures, which is an open source approach where they've got 33 different meeting microstructures to really engage people. So if you're looking for ways in a parish council situation, or in your work situation, to foster engagement from everyone, then this can be a powerful tool to do that. And we'll actually go ahead and try that with one of the basic structures in just a few minutes. Okay, I had one submitted question. Thank you to the anonymous person who submitted a question. And that was, how might a team go about resolving differences in opinion or perspective on the team's priorities or action items? And, yeah, I don't want to be Pollyanna and say that everything is wonderful when you get people together, because of course people have different ideas. I think one of the things that has really helped in the work that I do, which I think is really relevant to work in parishes as well, is really getting everyone to align behind the purpose. So in the secular work that I'm doing, in this case, there was a really strong purpose around protecting farmers from this devastating virus disease. Okay, obviously in our life as Orthodox Christians, we have a shared mission, we have a shared purpose, in bringing God's love into the world, and in what your parishes are trying to do to be the body of Christ. Like, that's our shared mission and purpose. So having people aligned behind that, I find that really helpful in sort of providing a clarifying function of what we're trying to do in terms of bringing people together. And then I also find that when you engage people in developing the solutions, so that you're not coming in and simply imposing them, but the ideas are being generated by the group, they're being discussed by the group, and then you find that as the group, as the people involved own those ideas, implementation and follow-up just becomes so much simpler. Now, having said all that, you know, we are in a situation where there's authority, and you know, if the team doesn't all agree on things, then after you've had the discussion and you've brought it forward, you know, sometimes a decision has to be made. And in this example that I gave, that situation with the cassava diseases, we had a situation where some of the scientists involved actually wanted to do some experiments with what's called infectious clones, which are ways of actually experimenting with the virus so you can understand it better. And after some discussion from the funder side, actually my manager said, we're not going to fund that. And so in that case, we had the authority to say, you know what, like, we understand you want to do this. The answer is no. You know, and similarly in a parish situation, you know, if the bishop tells you to do something, well, the bishop's got authority, and you know, you've got to trust that, well, we're all working together to be the body of Christ, and we're seeking God's will together, and we know that God has given, you know, the bishop and the priest authority. And so that was why, that's, for me, that's I think one way that things get resolved. But I do find that having a clarifying shared purpose, you know, has generally really helps getting people to share clarity on what needs to happen next for the priorities. So that's my answer to that. People may have other answers. That's my thoughts on that question. Thank you for the question. Okay, so what we're going to do now is move into discussion. And what I'd like to do, and Holly has very bravely agreed to try this, is to actually use this liberating structure that I mentioned earlier, called 1, 2, 4, all. And so the way it works is that first we're just going to take a minute quietly, all together. I invite you to take a pen and paper, or if you're going to type things out, and just quietly for yourself, see if you can answer these questions. Like, what are your thoughts on these questions? So in your parish life or the leadership situation that you're in, what are some examples? Maybe it's just one example of a complex challenge that you need to address. Just sort of quietly sit with that and think about that for yourself. And then, can you identify a stakeholder group, a group of diverse people who could offer fresh perspectives to the challenge you're facing, right? So maybe you're trying to raise funds, and you used to, you know, have a big street party and Greek food, and, you know, invite people in. Like, are there people maybe in the community you could reach out to that offer fresh perspectives? And then, just thirdly, what are some concrete ways that you can include and engage those people who want to just, you know, have ideas? The way that this will work is that you'll first go into a group of 2. Well, after we've done it individually, you'll go into a group of 2. And the reason for that is because it actually forces both of you to participate. So you can't just sort of hide behind, engages everyone. So you're going to a group of 2, and then after, you won't have very long, so you've got to be quite focused. You'll have about, I think, about 2 minutes each. And then Holly will, once we've got, she'll send you a note to say, okay, you're about halfway through. And so make sure you give each other a chance to speak. And then you're going to a group of 4. So it'll be the 2 of you will merge into a group of 4. And in that group of 4, you just want to just sort of quickly give a readout on what you talked about in your group of 2. And if anything really arose for you from that. Now, if you have time, this was a bonus question that Holly encouraged me to put up. I'm quite excited. The bonus question would be, you know, can you think about framing your challenge as an anti-problem? You know, that you could think about it backwards, and perhaps that would unleash a creative way to think about something. So then what we'll do is, after you've gone through that, we'll invite you to come back, see what the time is, and we won't have a lot of time for discussion, but what we might do is just use the chat function, perhaps to see what people have come up with, particularly in terms of the anti-problem as a bonus. Okay, so with that, I invite us to take a quiet minute to sit with the questions individually, and then after a minute, Holly will start putting us into groups.
All right, I'll move you into groups of 2 right now.
Great, so welcome back everybody. And we have a short amount of time for discussion and questions. So maybe we could just do a visual check-in. So on a scale of engagement, so just you're feeling engaged individually in the discussion, can I see a show of hands, like out of 5? Like, how engaging was that for you compared to being in a larger group? Yeah, wow, that's great. So if you know, we have very little time, and Holly said we could go just a couple of minutes past the hour. But if I could encourage people, perhaps just to put into the chat function if you feel moved, and maybe we could concentrate on the bonus question. Were there any framings of anti-problems that you found particularly, you know, helpful that you'd like to share with the group? Okay, so Daniel thought of involving a lack of communication. So we actually did an anti-problem once at work where we said, how could we avoid communicating with each other? How could we avoid knowing who's doing what? And we came up with all sorts of answers, like I could eat lunch at my desk, you know, I could travel all the time, I could not talk to people in the hallways, you know, and then you realize, oh, wait a minute, like I'm doing that. I'm eating lunch at my desk, you know, I'm not talking to people. What not to do in church during a pandemic, from Claire. Yeah, so there you might want to think about, and so maybe a little controversial here, but how in church how could we spread disease in our church, you know? And but that might be a little bit too close to the bone right now. How do we make sure our young adults are never engaged in the church? Yeah, that could be a really powerful one. How do we ensure we never engage with our neighbors? Right. We talked about, yes, yeah, so engaging with communities that are not Orthodox. Right, so there's a point here that we're at risk in alienating a key group, and the anti-problem of purposely alienating them is embarrassingly revealing. Yeah, so how could we alienate a group in our midst? What could we do to help them be alienated? That could be really pretty powerful. Great, well, it's wonderful to see the chat. You know, we are at the half-hour mark now, and I know this has also been very rushed, but I just want to really thank you for engaging, and thank you for the nice comments, even though I hadn't meant to leave that picture up. I really appreciate it, and it's such a blessing to be with you all in the spirit, and you know, and for the support and love and wisdom and grace that flows through the Orthodox Church is such a gift, and it's a gift to those of us in the secular sphere of work. And so I thank you all for your ministries and for sharing them with us, and thank you to this Leadership Institute.